This week's Four Questions Journalist Spotlight is brought to you by Leff's Atlanta Media, Atlanta's best journalist database. Subscribe at leffsatlantamedia.com.
Welcome to another edition of our Four Questions Journalist Spotlight, where we are talking with yet another awesome journalist from Atlanta and or Georgia, since we're kind of expanding outside the perimeter once in a while here, but not today. Today we are ITP, slightly, maybe sometimes OTP a little bit, but not as far as last week's, which went all the way to Savannah. But we're talking to George Chidi today, and I'm not going to say George Chidi with, because George Chidi's with a lot of places. So we're gonna talk about kind of everything that's going on. But before we do that, tell me a little bit about George Chidi. How'd you get to where you are today, and a little bit about your journalism background?
So my life is weird. Like, I always have to start with that. Like,
I love weird. Weird is great. I get more viewers and listeners if I say, I got a weird guest today.
Yep. I bounce back and forth between being a journalist and being an activist or something like that. And I have for a long time. But I started off my journalism career in the Army. I was an Army journalist. I covered infantry training in the Pacific, with the 25th Infantry Division up until 1999, which was interesting. Like, once upon a time, I was skinny. Finished college at UMass Amherst, and started writing about technology in 2000, 2001, 2002, which is to say I covered the .com crash in Boston. And that left me in the wilderness for a little while because everything went screwy. Found myself teaching middle school as a middle school substitute for a while. Like, it was madness. Decided I wanted to be a journalist again. In between there, I worked on some politics in Boston, I should say. I ran as an independent for a state house seat in Massachusetts 20 years ago. That's a fun fact nobody knows. I had a problem with a corrupt politician, and I decided to just do something about it myself. I got spanked. I got smoked like a sausage. I got whipped like cream. Like, I would have been a good breakfast, actually. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot about politics by going and trying to do it. And so I ended up in North Carolina at a small paper in North Carolina for a year, writing about politics, and the AJC hired me. And I covered growth and development and business and crime, and that's the thing that's important. They shifted me to a crime beat, and I hated it. I still hate crime. I still hate writing about crime. The problem is I'm good at it. So I left the AJC, got an MBA, and then started freelancing for whoever, and found myself writing a lot about inequality and crime and social problems around Atlanta. At that point, I got hired to be an activist for Central Atlanta Progress, working on quality of life problems and homelessness downtown in Atlanta. I did that for a few years. Left there to go to a housing startup. And then suddenly, like, COVID hits, and I'm a journalist again. I'm one of these guys. Like, journalism, by the way, is a fraught, ridiculous, difficult business to be in. And most people don't make any money at it. I'm still kind of shocked that I'm able to keep a roof over my head as a freelance guy.
Well, I tell you, there's a lot of folks I know around Atlanta and other places that make a pretty good living doing freelance work. Some of them are working for one publication, some are working for 10. You gotta be a good smart business person to be able to do it too, right?
I think so. Like, it's all about hustle. You see something that's worth writing about, you jump on it as quickly as you can, and you establish relationships early so that you've got a place to go when you need to. So I've written for Atlanta Magazine. I've written for The Guardian, Vice, whoever had a paycheck with Coinbase. like CoinDesk. Like I saw some stuff on like cryptocurrency, and I'm like, oh, I know enough about that to give you a story. And oh, we will give you a $400 check. And I'm like, I will take that $400 check. Thank you very much. Um, so now I write for Decatur-ish, and that's where I put like local political stuff. When it's a more like statewide or national story, I'll write for The Intercept, which is a publication that's focused on sort of adversarial journalism. It's much more investigative. But the bulk of my time right now, oh, by the way, I also appear on Fox 5 as a sort of an opinion columnist, which is bizarre. Like it's TV and opinion at the local level. Yeah, I'm a talking head.
Well,
And,
talk about. I want to make sure we talk about the Fox 5, the show that you started doing.
yeah.
So is that in addition to what you're just talking about, the opinion columnist?
Yeah. So it's yes, it's in addition to that.
Okay.
The once a month or so, I do a 5-minute bit for Fox 5 Atlanta called "Like It or Not," which is looking at this, that, or the other thing. But ever since the street protests of last year, I've been working on a quarterly series called "The Next Atlanta," where we basically check in with the city and with the powers that be to see whether or not they're actually living up to all of the promises that were made while people were in the street. Like what's working, what's different, what's not, and most importantly, why is the world the way it is right now? Like if look, we all recognize the problems around equity and social justice and racial inequality. They persist for reasons. They're not, we would solve these things tomorrow if there was a simple solution that everybody agreed on. The problem is that doesn't exist. And so that's the thing you want to explore. What are the roadblocks? That's what the Next Atlanta is about. It's like, why haven't we done this yet? Why does it look like this?
And that's a quarterly show, is that right?
It's quarterly, and the next one we'll be filming that about 3 weeks from now, and we're looking at how the political environment here is dealing with this massive increase in crime. Violent crime is warping politics all over Metro Atlanta right now, and for good reasons. Like it's a real problem.
Right.
But it would be very easy to backtrack on some of the, progressive reforms that everybody had been looking at when people were in the street last year. And that sort of dichotomy that's what that show's about.
Okay. So quarterly for now, and
So
then
I'm not doing that,
weekly,
like the main
weekly.
focus of my life.
Yeah. So you're gonna go from quarterly to weekly on that show at some point?
I don't know.
I'm kidding. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of work.
They might.
That's a lot of work.
Like it's a popular show. I'm a little surprised. People stop me on the street and say they saw it. I'm like, you've got to be kidding. I'm a talking baked potato. Like, how do you even recognize me? Most of my time though is spent on a newsletter, amazingly enough, which has become very lucrative, called The Atlanta Objective, where I'm like deep diving into the crime problem and where the crime problem came from and how to fix it.
So where can folks find that newsletter?
So go to I'm sorry, that's the other one. Go to the atlantaobjective.substack.com.
Yeah.
That's the atlantaobjective.substack.com.
Okay. All right. So we started talking earlier, I think before we came recording, about how reporting has changed for you during the pandemic. You and I were kind of talking about some of the good and the bad of that.
Yeah. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like if you're a journalist, you kind of need to be where everything is happening. In other words, what makes you different from some guy sitting on their couch? But I've learned to hate having to leave the house if I can avoid it. Like there's some value in knowing that sources can, you could get somebody on a Zoom call eventually and have a conversation that the public will view as valid and legitimate. Um, like the problem is you've got a lot of folks who are working remotely, and I respect remote work. I'm remote working right now, but the people don't leave their cell phones on. Like you'll drop an email on someone and you'll get a response in 3 days. And as a journalist, it makes you have an aneurysm and die.
Right. Sure.
The other thing is that I spent a lot of time over the last year writing about politics and protest. And so I found myself in the street. 1 year ago today, I'm in the street, like with other people. I'm running up and down the street, watching people breaking windows, because I wanted to see that firsthand. We're in this media environment where everybody's lying like hell all the time. And the only way to beat that is to be an eyewitness present in the moment with a camera running so that you can prove that what you've just said is true.
Right.
And that means being out and about.
So, and we've kind of hit this a little bit, but are there some specific issues and stories that you're going to be covering for the show coming up in a couple of weeks, taping in a couple of weeks? And then kind of in general in your writings, what are the top issues that you really want to be covering and focused on?
So right now, like the thing that's floating under the radar that it's going to explode, like it's going to, and it may define news for the year, is the degree to which there's been a music industry gang war going on in the streets of Atlanta for the last year or two. It's people sort of vaguely aware that, hey, a rapper got shot, and then it just sort of fades out. Turns out most of this stuff is connected one way or another to each other, and it's part of a pattern that's responsible for probably about half of the increase in crime in the city of Atlanta over the last 12 months. I was a bit surprised myself when I saw just how much of it could be attributed to this. So massive crime spike, biggest in the country. You have a new police chief, and we're in an election year where Kasim Reed is talking about coming back into. And Kasim Reed is like an enemy of journalists. I'm just going to tell you that. Like it's more than Torpy. Like he's like when your communications director is being criminally charged, like for not giving you the information you're supposed to get. Like there's a problem.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, we could spend a whole show kind of dealing with some of that kind of stuff that happened with the release of documents and all of that.
1.4 million pieces of paper printed out just to screw with us.
I know, many of which were blank. I know.
But yeah, so I'm going to get the chief of police on the show, and we're going to talk about what the plan looks like. And I really want to talk about some of there's a fine line between vigilance and hysteria with what's going on in Buckhead and crime right now. People have a reason to be concerned, like crime has risen in Buckhead, but it's not nearly as significant as it is in downtown and midtown and other parts of the city. And I think that comparison is in order, and that's one of the things I'm looking at.
So that's a really interesting point. So is it just that when a crime happens in Buckhead, it gets a lot more media coverage because it's
in Buckhead
as opposed to
Let me put this in some perspective. As of May 13th, there were 48 homicides in the city of Atlanta. How many of those homicides do you believe were of white people? Bearing in mind, Buckhead is about 85% white. The answer is 0.
Yeah.
No white person has been murdered in the city of Atlanta in this calendar year. Of the 232 gun assaults in the city of Atlanta, 6 were white people. I'm trying to figure out whether or not anyone in Buckhead has actually been shot. It's not like who lives in Buckhead, and that's the important thing. It's the residents of Buckhead who are concerned, but they're not actually the victims of the violence. It's people who are visiting, and I don't think they've really wrapped their heads around that.
Right. Well, I mean, how many shootings? Six shootings, seven shootings at Atlantic Square in the last year, right?
Yeah,
Which
about
are
that.
not necessarily, as you said, not necessarily residents, maybe people who are visiting, or maybe people who are not from.
People who work there,
Yeah.
people who are visiting there, but not the people who live there. And a lot of this speaks to like this really amazingly difficult split in wealth and inequality in the city of Atlanta. The average white household in the city of Atlanta has an income over $80,000 a year. The average black household, an income under $30,000 a year. It's the biggest split in the
Yeah.
United States. Um, People are living in two different worlds right now, and Black Atlanta is hurting. So that's the focus of what I'm writing about these days.
All right. So let's get to the more challenging questions here. This is going to be the hardest question. This is always the hardest questions.
I fear nothing.
What is the coolest thing about George Chidi?
Oh, no. I see. That is a hard problem question because I'm a dork, nerd, dweeby, blurred. I am a not. There's nothing cool about me at all. Like I'm Urkel with more body weight.
What's your favorite? What's your favorite hobby that you do? Maybe this will kind of bring it home for us. What does George do when he's not on? What do you got?
I play Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, awesome! That's cool.
What I do. Like in fact, I'm like mildly obsessive right now about trying to build an African themed Dungeons and Dragons setting. And I spend all way too much time writing about that. There are days when I've blown deadlines because I was writing the Dungeons and Dragons stuff instead of like real stuff that will pay me.
So do you have a group that plays with you?
I do, and it's funny. Like they're all politicians and journalists, and I've got a sort of a waiting list of other politicians and journalists who want in.
I haven't played D&D since I played a little bit in high school, but I haven't played much. I haven't played much since then.
So it got super popular about 5 or 6 years ago again, and then during the pandemic, it exploded. People were playing it with their friends over Zoom, basically.
All right. Okay.
They had the best year ever.
All right. So last book that you've read that you want to admit to publicly?
Americana by Sarah, who wrote Americana? Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Amazing book.
All right. Favorite Atlanta restaurant?
I'm gonna go with. I've been thinking about this because I eat. I'm gonna go with Sushi Yoko.
That's good. Is that the one by Lennox?
No, it's actually over. It's this hole in the wall. Blink and you miss it over a Winters Chapel Road, like near Norcross.
Oh, okay.
And it is authentic, and everybody there is Japanese. You walk in, you're like, hey, wait a minute. With a little Japanese market attached to the store, and it's the best. It's the best.
Okay, so favorite guilty pleasure. I think we covered that one.
Yeah, that's it.
Local getaway. What's a place you like to get away to?
The Goat Farm.
Oh, what's the Goat Farm?
The Goat Farm is this anachronism in the middle of Atlanta, and I fear it's going to go away. Like go over like to West Side Provisions, and behind West Side Provisions on a back road is a literal goat farm, and these bombed out buildings that look like it was a 1880s cotton mill that's falling down. It's been taken over by artists. There's a little coffee shop called the War Horse, which is generally not open.
Generally not. That sounds like a good business model.
It is an anti-business model. And you're looking around like, what is this place? But it's populated by artists, and they shot some of the Hunger Games there, believe it or not. It's just a fabulous place to go write.
I could see their mouth. Screw the man. We're not going to open. We're going to stay closed. That's our business. We're not going to open.
It's more like they've got to put up a giant "go away" sign, like at the front. Like that's the idea.
That's great. Oh, okay. So I got to ask you. So back to D&D for a second. So if you looked at George, are you a wizard, a warrior, a scout? What's your character?
God help me, I'm a bard.
You're a bard. Oh, okay.
I'm a bard.
That's awesome. That makes sense.
Yes, although I would call myself a griot. But yes, a bard. That's me.
So do you want to sing us out today?
No.
No, I'm not going to do that. All right. So is there anything we haven't talked about stuff you're working on that folks should know about? I think we kind of hit the high points, and I'll drop in some graphics here and there too.
I think that's about it. It's this thing with the newsletter is fascinating. It's supported by subscribers, and the Substack is this venture capital backed attempt at making independent news more relevant and more profitable. And they are very supportive of what I'm doing here. I'm one of 6 news reporters nationally that they've chosen to partner with directly because they think that what I'm looking at is a big deal. The Atlanta objective is turning into an obsession for me right now. And I have the freedom to go and do and say whatever the hell I want with it without having to worry about getting fired.
Yeah.
And as a journalist, there's nothing better.
It's good not to be fired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
hey, what do you think? People. What do you think about? There's been a couple of black-focused news operations that have popped up recently. You got the Black News Channel that's popped up, and then the other one is the Black Information Network on what was WGST. What are your thoughts on those two operations?
So I'm glad that I'm starting to see more African-American focused news, in part because like when you're watching like local TV, like out of a 22-minute news hole, you're going to see 6 minutes of crime coverage, and which is going to be a parade generally of black faces who are shown as criminal suspects without any context whatsoever. And it actually creates as much of the problem as it solves. Seeing African-American oriented news trying to get at this stuff is a big deal. I think that ultimately solves problems. It's more than just representation and diversity. Like there are legitimate issues that are happening in the Black community that everybody else just doesn't know. Like the Black community understands it to some degree, but they need someone knocking on the door. And it's good. I think it's a good thing.
Does it create a kind of a echo chamber of an echo chamber is maybe not the right word, but do those networks appeal to just black audiences, or do you think they appeal to a wider audience, a white audience as well?
It's a fair question. And I think they're all going to wrestle with that because I know that people are going to say, like, well, you should just keep the black dollar within the black community and you shouldn't have to appeal to a white audience and whatnot. And then you die economically. I mean, that's the story. I think eventually they are going to have to be able to appeal to a wide audience. But what does that appeal actually look like? Like if it's done on terms that do not diminish, the black voter, the black experience, where you're not exploiting black people in order to create a white audience, I think you're fine. Like, and maybe a new model will emerge from this.
Yeah. So those are two that I mentioned. Are there any others that have started recently that are worth mentioning?
Aaron Haynes, former AJC reporter.
Yeah.
Aaron Haynes, who's got, I think it's the 19th.
Yes, the 19th Project. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, and I might be wrong there. Hang on a second. I'm just going to check. Aaron Haynes. God, I love being at home. The 19th. So Politico is starting to complain that the 19th is getting all the good interviews with the Biden administration. Literally, that was a story that came up this morning. And Erin Haynes
Erin's
killing
awesome. She's great. Yeah, I was so disappointed when she left Atlanta, but
yeah, me too.
She's incredible. Yeah,
but that's the thing. Like when we're talking about like the sort of narrow appeal, and then you look at the 19th, and oh no, wait a minute, like she's killing it. Like everybody needs to read the 19th. That's the only place you're going to get some of this stuff.
Right.
Like, and there it is. And I feel the same way. Like the things that I'm writing about, like I plainly have an interest within the Black community of figuring out how to reduce crime, but it's a universal story.
We were having this conversation earlier about what's a good length for a podcast. So we are there. We are at that perfect length of a podcast. So I'm going to say thank you. Thank you, George, for taking some time with us. And we will see everyone next week for another edition of our 4 Questions Journalist Spotlight. Thank you, George.
Fabulous. Thank you.